Interest and principal you pay, where does it go? And how can it come back to you instead of hurting you?
You are listening to Wealth Talks with the McPhees. Interest is always seen as a bad thing in our world, and that could be because most people don't keep the interest that they pay. They're paying it to somebody else, and someone else gets to keep the money, and so it's seen as a negative thing generally. But what if you're paying the interest back to a place that you control and where you get to recover a part of it over time? Does that make interest bad?
Oh, that changes the picture, but let's talk about interest for a second and realize that interest is really just the payment on someone else's money. You wouldn't work for free and be able to sustain yourself. So why would you expect money to work for free? Because money is just an extension of ourselves. And if someone's going to let you use their money, it's only right that they should collect some interest on that, because even Jesus said that in his story of the talents and the minas in Matthew 25 and Luke 19. The least those people could have done was put his money on loan so that the interest that belonged to him would have been there when he got back. Mm-hmm. And that's the least we're required to do with money. So interest in itself is not a bad thing. It's when we get into usury, now we've got problems, because that's taking advantage of other people simply because they don't have the capital and you can charge them. Now, let's take a look at where some of those usuries exist in our society. Payday loans, 400% interest is charged in some places on those. Oh, wow. Pawn shops, 200 to 300% interest is not unusual. That's usury. And so it has to be a fair deal. You can't take advantage of people in using their money. Now that we got the interest thing taken care of, let's get on with how we can make interest work for us.
Yeah. Now, if you're paying too much in interest through the nose to other people and on debts that you've accumulated, well, maybe that's out of balance, and maybe that is a bad thing. But on the other hand, if you're earning interest, then that's not necessarily a bad thing either for your personal finances. And as we've just seen overall in the economy, it's a great thing because it is the rightful wage of your money at work when it's reasonable.
And, you know, we're going to talk about credit card debt here because in 2019, $122 billion was spent by Americans on credit card interest. Now, we work with people and help them to get out of debt and have an asset when they do get out of debt, so they don't feel like they just went through this debt reduction exercise for no reward. Mm-hmm. It's very important that they have something tangible, an asset to hold at the end of that time and say, look what I did and what I accomplished. But, you know, it's not unusual for us to see people with 19, 20, 26, even 37% interest rates on their credit cards, is it, John?
No, we've seen it.
And that's like bleeding to death. Mm-hmm. There's no way you can survive that interest rate on a long-going basis. And that's the problem with America. Most credit cards are not paid off at the end of the month. Mm. And so that's a revolving debt that catches people, and they end up losing, you know, this 26 to 37% interest right off the top of their wages. That really, really hurts. And that has to come to an end. And that's what we help people do.
Okay. So the people that are paying this interest, this $122 billion, they are getting the benefit of the purchases that they make on these credit cards.
They're just paying way too much for them.
Yeah, and they can end up paying much more than the benefit on those. I mean, what if you have a $5,000 credit card here? What are the payments going to be on that over time to pay that off with interest?
Well, it depends on when you start making more than the minimal payments. And that's something that many people don't do. They don't make more than the minimal payment. And so it just goes on infinitely. Mm-hmm. And so we have to realize that these debts need to be removed. They need to be eliminated. And unfortunately, Joe Biden and George Bush, when George Bush took office, made it very, very difficult for you to eliminate those debts through bankruptcy. So they pretty much have to be paid off by what you're working now.
Okay. So what's a way that people can recover some of this interest over time instead of just, working to pay off debt and then being at zero when they get there?
Well, obviously, it has to do with life insurance, or we wouldn't be probably talking about it on this show. But life insurance is a contract that Nelson Nash discovered when he found himself paying exorbitant interest rates back in the early 80s for a piece of real estate he was buying. He owed $500,000 and was paying 23% interest on that.
Wow.
And those loans were coming to be renewed every quarter because they were a commercial loan. And so that means the interest rates could fluctuate.
Right.
And they weren't going down, they were going up. And so at that point, he realized that he'd gotten himself into a real financial bind. And with that, he discovered that the cash values in his life insurance policies, which he'd been paying on since the 50s, had money he could get at between 5 and 8%.
Wow.
And he was upset that he hadn't been paying more premiums into those policies because he could have accessed a whole lot more money. But at that point, he decided, instead of paying all this interest to the creditors, I'm going to start paying higher premiums into my life insurance so I can borrow more money out.
So how does that work? I mean, are you able to put higher premiums into life insurance and get out? Was he able to get out the money and pay off the bankers the next day? Or did it take time?
No. Nelson talks about this in his book. He says it's going to take between 20 and 25 years for you to build a system of policies where you can pretty much eliminate having to use other people's financing to get to what you need in life. So this isn't a get-rich-quick scheme. It's not a fast process. It's a slow and steady, which is going to win the race, because not only does whole life insurance allow us to recover most of the interest, if not all of it, it allows us to reuse the principal over and over again, because it's like a revolving line of credit that we own.
Mm-hmm.
And once we establish that line of credit, when we borrow from it and repay it, we're just restoring our line of credit again to use it again.
Okay. So it's going to take time to pay enough premiums into the life insurance, you're saying, in order to have enough to borrow out as that line of credit.
Yeah, when we first started doing this, we thought it would take 7 years, because that's what Mr. Nash talks about in his book, that you need to fund your system for about 7 years, and then you'll have money to make a major purchase. But it doesn't take that long to refinance credit card debt or minor things that we're purchasing.
In fact, it's amazing how quickly it does happen when you sit down and work the numbers.
Yeah, oftentimes people are taking a loan within the first 30 days if they're paying their premium annually. It all works the same. It's just that Nelson wanted to say in his book that you wait until the policy has cash values that are higher than what you've paid in premium. And that doesn't take place typically in 7 years anymore. It usually takes place between years 8 and 12, simply because times have changed, interest rates are different, policies are designed different, and the IRS has changed the rules on how life insurance is written.
Yeah. So with the, getting money out of life insurance, that's a process that can happen fairly quickly. What about the people that say, well, I could put money into a savings account and take it out the same way? What are they missing by doing that? If they just put the money in a savings account, because then they wouldn't have to pay interest when they took the money out of the savings account to go pay off this debt.
That's exactly right. And Nelson has an example of that in his book. He says you could do this by funding certificates of deposits or just in a savings account.
Sure.
But when you pay the interest back, who's collecting the interest? It's the bank, and that goes to the shareholders of the bank, because you're not part of the structure that gets any dividends from that bank.
Okay, so not making profits off your money while you're saving it or while you're putting it in the certificate of deposit. Maybe you're earning a tiny interest rate on it, really tiny in today's world. But what are the bankers earning off of that while it's sitting there? That's correct. Okay.
Yeah, and if you take your money out of a savings, you lose the interest altogether. Although you could put up a CD or a savings account as collateral, just like you put up your policy as collateral to the insurance company for a loan. You're still paying that interest to someone else that you're never going to get a share of.
Sure, or
And
losing the interest that you could have earned. Yeah.
Yes. And so that's why whole life insurance is so unique. It gives us a guaranteed value that we're going to have every year of the contract. If the premiums are paid according to the way that it's outlined there. And as long as we pay interest on any policy loans, those guarantees are going to be there. And so now all we have to do is do the math around a loan to see if it's going to be profitable for us to take a loan from a policy, or whether we should look for less expensive money in that we could get a lower interest rate from somebody else.
Okay, so what do the numbers sound like on an example? How much are we standing to keep by doing it this way?
Well, if we take a policy loan for $50,000 in a policy that has accumulated that much cash value,
okay,
and we allow that loan to be out for 6 years, because we're the ones that determine how long the loan's going to be. We could pay it back tomorrow, or we could pay it back in 50 years.
Right, because the insurance company only wants the interest.
They only need the interest because they are holding our death benefit as collateral. So if we die while the loan's out, then they're just going to take $50,000 from our death benefit and pay the loan off, and the rest goes to our beneficiaries. So extending that loan out for 6 years and paying the 5% interest that the insurance company is requiring is going to be about $9,851 a year.
Okay.
And doing that and putting it back into the policy with dividends, we see that the cash value increases above the guaranteed cash values by $28,324.
That's a pretty fair chunk. Now, how big was this policy to start with?
Well, the policy started off with putting $1,000 a month into it for the first 7 years.
Okay.
And then the premium dropped down to $41.96.
Okay. So then in the 8th year after that premium drops is when we're taking the $50,000 loan.
We're taking the $50,000 loan. We're going for 6 years. And we can see here in year 14, the cash value is 128, somewhere around there. And with the dividends, repaying this loan, your cash value is about it is increased by that $28,000.
Okay.
So what's happening? As total interest paid for this loan was only $9,105.
Okay. And that's over the whole 6 years.
Yeah, that's less than the $28,000 that the policy increased.
The policy grew by quite a bit.
And the principal came back. You've got it again. And you've got more money in there than what the interest was. So how much did the interest really cost you?
Right. Well, now you continued paying premiums during that time, but it still grew by more than the premiums that were paid too.
It did. Yes. So in this case, you got your principal back, and you recovered all and more of the interest that you paid.
Okay.
So that's important to realize. Now, if you could have got a loan for 1% someplace else and still had this policy, would it make sense to take a loan from the policy still yet? Or
well, I would say it would make sense to take the bank loan because you're still going to get the $28,000 growth in the policy whether you take the loan or not.
That's correct. And now you're paying less interest. You won't get that interest back, but
you'll get more than that back in the policy.
$9,105 is more than 1% of the $28,000 that you gain. So
sure is.
That makes sense to be do the math.
And the really cool thing about that is if you do go ahead and take the loan at 1% from another bank, in this case, and let's say that you encounter an emergency then, and you need a reserve from which to make a few monthly payments out of this, or even to pay the loan off to the bank.
Yes.
You could do that. You have the money here in the life insurance policy as a reserve in order to do that. So you're not taking any more risk by adding the bank loan here.
The problem with borrowing money from other people is that most people don't have the tailwind that Nelson Nash talked about that helps the airplane get from here in Las Vegas to San Diego, much faster because we got this 20-mile-an-hour tailwind pushing us. It accelerates our ground speed by 20 miles an hour.
Yeah.
Most people don't build the policy to have that constant tailwind regardless of whatever they do financially. And so that's why the life insurance policy is so important. And it comes important too because we have something happening right now in our life that hasn't happened this severely since 2008, and that's inflation. Inflation is now, according to some people, higher than it was during the Carter administration back in the 70s. It's just that the way inflation is calculated today, it's taken out some of the things they used to use.
Yeah, like the prices of food and groceries. Certain things aren't included in some of those inflation statistics anymore.
But we all, go to the gas pump on a regular basis, and I know that I'm paying more than 50% more for gasoline right now than I was back in November. And so that affects everything else, because the fuel costs to get food to the grocery stores, to the restaurants, to the clothes, to all the consumables that we have to have goes up, because that cost has to be figured into them. I don't know if the rest of you have noticed it, but the size of containers are shrinking while the price is staying the same. We notice this particularly in ice cream packaging, but it's happening in other things too.
Campbell's soup, ice cream, you name it. The size of the container is shrinking, but the price is remaining the same or even going up. This inflationary process is due to monetary policy and government spending, and you can't pass huge trillion-dollar budgets and not expect this to happen. So what's going on is, in a life insurance policy, you sign up when you purchase it for a fixed premium for the rest of your life. And every year you pay that premium, the value of the dollar you're paying it with has decreased. But the cost doesn't go up on the life insurance policy just because the value of your dollar has gone down. That's correct.
And so Nelson said that in itself was a hedge against inflationary costs. And people say, well, we've all dealt with inflation, but most people don't realize that since 1990, inflation has destroyed more than 100% of the value of your dollar.
Just since 1990?
Just since 1990.
Wow.
Inflation, if we take the cumulative effect of it, is 102%.
And that's because it's compounding every year.
Yes.
That number, it looks really small every year, but when you start compounding the effect of that, that's what's destroying the 100% and more of the purchasing power of your dollar.
Yeah. So we're already experiencing inflation rates like in the 80s, where it was like 13.5%, even though they're only reporting 5.8 now because of the way they figure it. But those peaks of inflation are going to be followed by high rates of interest, because that's the way the Federal Reserve fights inflation, is they tighten the money supply by saying, okay, we're going to make it so expensive that people aren't going to borrow money. And then we're going to find ourselves right back in the same place Nelson Nash found himself, paying 23% interest on real estate loans and wanting to know, where can I get money at a different place? So now is the time to be building up the cash values in your life insurance policy, so that when those high inflationary periods happen again, there's going to be opportunities for people that have cash on hand in life insurance to get some really, really good deals.
That's so true. And, oftentimes during periods of inflation, that's when you have the financial gurus come in and say that life insurance isn't such a great place to keep money, because look at all the rates of return that you could get by making these other investments. But when when reality hits, that's when you want to reserve. And so when do you want to build that reserve? It follows that you need to build it during times when everything seems hunky-dory out there in the world, so that when the tough times come, you have the reserve that you really want.
Well, this is kind of ironic that people would say that, because even if you don't want to buy real estate or invest in different assets or take a risk in the market, when those high interest rates come, just take a policy loan out of your policy for 5% and go buy a CD for 16 or 17% that's guaranteed.
There you go.
Or roll your cash values over into an annuity that's given those high rates of interest. If you don't have the reserve now, those opportunities won't happen.
Correct. That is so true. So these are some things to think about with the way interest works. You want it working for you, not against you. Don't pay the $122 billion to the credit cards every year. Instead, set up a system that you can use regularly to make that interest return to you, at least recovering a portion of it, building an asset while you're doing everything that you have to do anyway in life. And while you're at it, why not make it a hedge against inflation to help protect against some of what's happening there, and to build a reserve for when reality hits, when the Federal Reserve starts fighting this inflation, you have a reserve to fall back upon and to take opportunities that aren't available to anyone else.
Well, John, Mr. Nash said in his book that 34.5 cents of every dollar is lost to interest, whether you're paying interest to someone else or you're using your money and losing the growth you could have had on it.
Mm-hmm.
His goal was just to help people recover part of that 34 cents. And if we could help you, the listener, recover just part of the interest you're losing on your dollar when you spend it, just like we gave that example of losing, the growth on a dollar over the course of your lifetime, even if it was just 1%, that's, 60% of what you could have had is gone.
Mm-hmm.
And if you could have earned 5%, then 890% of what you could have had is gone.
Yeah.
It's just, you just never saw it. It's the unseen.
Mm-hmm.
If we could help you do that, we can, then give us a call here at 702-660-7000, because we want to help you keep more of the money that you make.
That's right. So you can give us a call here. You can also attend our event coming up in September here in Las Vegas, September 17th and 18th. So give us a call at 702-660-7000. Or you can also register on the website, life-benefits.com. You are listening to Wealth Talks with the McPhees. We'll be back again next week.